I'd like to welcome the man whom Stephen King recently referred to as America's best regional humorist, Tim Sample.
Thank you very much. Ain't this marvelous, huh? You only get about 4 of these days in the state of Maine all year, so I hope you appreciate this, dear. Can everybody hear me all right? Yeah. If you can't, just run right out and buy the record after the program, all right? And you can listen to this in the privacy of your own trailer. You'll have a marvelous time. Yeah, sit down in front. Yeah. Is that what you were hollering up there? Or was you just talking yourself? That's right. Yeah, get down there. This is important. It is. I am very proud of my Maine roots, and I want to make sure you understand, everybody here understands, that what I'm going to be doing tonight and what me and Bobby Bryan are going to be doing a little bit later on, and I'll explain the order of the service to you. But what we're going to be doing is something that has come to be referred to as Maine or down east humor, all right? So right up front, you got to realize, dear, this ain't got nothing to do with comedy. All right, that's very important. I'm sure you have seen comedy. They got it right on TV. And here's how it works in comedy. Somebody will come out and tell a joke, and then everybody laughs. They tell another joke, and folks laugh again. This ain't going to be like that. It ain't. A whole lot of this is going to go right over your head. But it's very important that you understand when that happens. It ain't that it ain't funny. You just don't get it. All right, so it's fine if you find yourself sitting through the whole program not laughing. That is understandable. Happens all the time. I just got to warn you, you're going to have to be awful careful driving home. It is going to sneak up on you. Just a warning, that's all. But I'm very proud, like I say, of being a native Mainer, and I travel all over the country doing this Maine humor. You probably don't believe that, but it is true. I just got back from a big tour of the western states, New Hampshire, Vermont. Huh? That New Hampshire, if you're a Mainer, you go to that New Hampshire, that's like another planet over there. Are you kidding me? You go across the border, and all of a sudden you're driving along, you can drive almost a mile without seeing a pothole. It's weird. If you're used to driving in Maine, you'll just dodge around for a while, you know, just out of habit, you know. But I travel all over, and all I got to do, as soon as I say to anybody, I say I'm going to do Maine humor, they get it. You say Maine humor, they get it right off. You go someplace, you tell a bunch of people someplace you're going to do an evening of Utah humor. They don't know what the heck you're talking about, see? But as soon as you mention the state of Maine, you say Maine humor, they get it. Because the state of Maine, we're famous for one thing that we do better than anybody else in the whole country, maybe on the whole planet. And that is a unique ability we got right here in the state of Maine to consistently come up with the snappy answer. Yeah, you know, that quick one-liner. We are famous for this, really. Major universities has done studies on this. Federally funded. To determine why is it that Maine people have that ability. Well, I got my own theory, see. I actually believe it comes from generation after generation of native Mainers getting asked a lot of numb questions. This will breed it in you. Now here, you got to understand something, see. This is all part of our Maine culture, and let's face it, let's be honest here. In the state of Maine, and I know about this, we have a kind of a love-hate relationship with the tourist industry. We do. We really, you know, ever since I was a kid, I heard it said from the time I was a little kid, we got to get more tourists in Maine, more tourists. They drilled it into us. We need more tourists. I'll tell you flat out, we don't. We don't. We could get by with fewer actual tourists, all right, as long as each one of them had more tourist dollars. You know, pump up the density factor. I'm working on something for the state tourism department referred to as the big tourist theory. Yeah, I think eventually we can get by in the state of Maine with one really wealthy tourist. Huh? Hey, I'm telling you, I'm voting for Ross Perot for that. Get him up here. Get old Ross the horse right up to Maine. I'd take the whole summer off, chauffeur him around, drop him off at Kittery at Labor Day. He'd drop about 8 or 10 billion. We'd split it up the rest of the year, you know. Be easier on the infrastructure, see. But here's where the trouble comes in. They're always coming up with these theories to develop the tourism. See, like you remember a few years ago, some of you locals will realize, a few years ago we had a referendum in the state of Maine. Should we widen the Maine Turnpike? You remember that one? You had a big vote on it. Should we widen the Maine Turnpike? Of course, I had my own theory about that. I says, yes, go ahead, widen it. 8 lanes out, 2 lanes in, but they didn't go for that. But see, the trouble is, I say you can go ahead and widen the turnpike all you want, but all it is a sucker punch for the tourists. See, because they're going to come sailing into the state of Maine without a clue in a Winnebago, with a Garfield all up in one window, a 4-year-old kid pressing up to the other one, sailing along, up on 2 wheels in the corner like a pulp truck, all right? And they see 27 lanes. They don't realize all 27 of them lanes is going to funnel right down into Route 1. Huh? Oh, yeah. Sure. You talk about life in the slow lane. I guess probably. Oh, yeah, this is it. You crawl along for about an hour staring at the same 300-pound guy with very few teeth, leaning on a sign that says slow. There's more than one way to interpret everything, really. Although I did hear that the state of Maine was able to save a fair amount of money. They was able to lay off about 1/3 of the road crew workers this summer because somebody designed a shovel that would stand up all by itself. But we run into this. This happens all over the state. It ain't just in the tourist towns, all over the state. I used to live up in the town of Palmyra, Maine, for a few years. I did. How many has ever been to Palmyra? Wait. This is you haven't been there. You wouldn't be waving and clapping like that there. But I live there. That's up on Route 2, and it's about 15 miles south of Bangor. It might be 20 miles north of Waterville and about 10 miles due west of Newport and a few miles east of Skowhegan. In other words, right in the hub of things, really. But I lived up there for years. My next-door neighbor, Wilbur Pinkham, an awful nice fellow, Wilbur. He had a hard life, he did. But Mainers are used to this. He had a tough life. He did drink a little. You might call Wilbur the town drunk. Although the town was so small, everybody kind of took turns, really. But he had a kind of a hard life. He had been married 4 separate times, and every time it ended in disaster. He got divorced, and he never seen it coming, you know. He got blindsided. He'd come home from the mill and all his stuff be out on the side of the road, you know. Just hit him hard every time, and he was 97 years old. I asked him, I said, geez, Wilbur, you figure with that kind of track record, you figure you're going to get married again? No, he says, I don't think so. He says, I think I'll just find a woman I don't like and buy her a house. Kind of cut to the chase, you know. But Wilbur, you see, there's one of the things that brings on this snappy answers. There's a certain crowd of people that come from away. I don't know where they come from, but wherever it is, you get the impression that somebody someplace told them to get lost. And they come to Maine. And that's what they done for about a month. They drive along. Wilbur was telling me this one time. He was sitting in front of Joe's General Store in Palmyra, and he was just sitting out on the steps, just sitting there with one arm as long as the other, you know. And the traffic was going by, and he seen this one car go by. It was a silver Volvo 240 DL with Connecticut plates. You might have seen this one round. It come charging by, hit the lights up to Newport, kind of rammed around the lights, cut over to Hartland, cut across the back way down to Pittsfield, back and forth I'd say about the 12th time he passed in front of the general store, he was getting rather peeved. He had resorted to the posture of driving that these folks from away will eventually get to, where they've got the road map unfolded right on the steering wheel in front of them, you know. And he had loosened up his collar. He was pretty upset. And he pulled up in front of the store. Like I said, Wilbur's just sitting there. He rolled the window down. He hollered out to Wilbur. He says, "How in the devil do you get to Bangor?" "Oh," says Wilbur, "most generally my brother-in-law takes me." You see, it takes a Mainer. Anybody, you might catch a snap. It takes a Mainer to know the one that'll push you right over the edge, you know. And even up to Eastport, Maine, you know I love the town of Eastport. I was just up to Eastport, and it's a nice area. It's a little bit economically depressed. A little bit. You can go up there. I mean, it's a nice place to visit. If you're going to go to Eastport, though, if I was you, I would bring my money with me, see, because there ain't got nothing just laying around up there, see. Although it is a nice town. But a couple of years ago, I was on one of these national TV shows. They come to Maine every once in a while. They was looking for some kind of local characters, and they had a film crew. They sent them up to the coast, and they ended up in Eastport. And they had this fella come in off the dock. He was a fisherman. He'd been kind of wore down to a nub over the years. And he was sitting there, and they run up to him, thought he'd look pretty good on camera, and they stuck a microphone in his face, and they said, "What do you think of this recession that we're having?" "Oh, geez," he says, "I don't know. I don't think the recession would be so bad if it wasn't coming right on the heels of such hard times." But being here in Damascotta at the Round Top Center for the Arts, and this is marvelous, ain't it? Let's give them a hand. This is better than, huh? Huh? And with all you folks sitting around out there, ain't you glad there weren't no cows out here today? Really, just or within the recent weeks. But I grew up down to Booth Bay Harbor, and I grew up, went to kindergarten, graduated from high school, the same 39 kids, so I'd say it's probably my hometown. But there's a certain group of people down around there, you know, that we've learned, the natives around, you learn to survive over the years. And there's a fella I know down there, and I asked him if I could use his name in this story. He says, "Go ahead. They can't be." I said, "I'll tell you what I'm going to say on the record." He says, "No, don't bother. It can't be any worse than what they said about me already down here for years." Douglas Carter. You know Dougie Carter? Now, wait a minute. You know, folks, no, wait a minute. I forgot to explain this, and this is important. As I go along in this program, you see, I am going to ask you questions. Every now and then I'll toss a question like, "Do you know Dougie Carter?" You got to realize something, dear. When I ask you them questions, I ain't interested in the truth. You see, I don't care whether you know Dougie Carter. It don't mean nothing to me, you see. I'm just trying to get the audience going. You understand? Let's try it again. How many here knows Dougie Carter? Ain't that more fun? Do you think I was going to check, did ya? Loose now. Well, anyways, Dougie Carter, like a bunch of other fellas, he has learned to survive and prosper. He runs the Booth Bay region lobstermen's cooperatives over on the east side of the harbor. That's where the lobstermen go out. They catch the lobsters, bring them in, cook them, and the tourists come in and attack them with plastic knives and forks. It's plenty entertaining for the locals, really. But see, over the years, folks like Dougie has been asked so many of these numb questions that they have become virtual masters of the art of the snappy answer. Now, Dougie told me this story. He said it was a few years ago, and it was right at the peak of the tourist season. I mean, the tourists were swarming all over that dock down there, worse than the black fly. Well, maybe not that bad, but they was swarming pretty heavy. And this one car pulled in, and you could tell right off it was from away without even looking at the plates. Because for one thing, it was a great big car. It was a foreign make. It was a Cadillac. I don't know if you ever seen one of them, but they're big things, great long things. That must have been 2 Dodge Darts long. It pulled right in, and this fella got out, and he had the outfit. You could tell right off he was a tourist. He had the whole outfit. He had the blue blazer with the brass buttons, the salmon-colored pants. Somebody got this on tonight? Probably. them white shoes that looks like golf shoes with little flaps over the laces. And here's the tip-off. It's a silk shirt undone right down the belly button. And with the gold chains around the neck. He had so many gold chains that looked like you clipped out a service merchandise flyer and glued it right on the front there. I tell you something, Dougie had him pegged right off. He took one look at him, he said, that's an Amway salesman right there. Let me tell you something, too. In the state of Maine, we don't joke around about Amway. We don't. I'll tell you something right now. You might joke around about it, but I'll tell you this right now. You get involved with Amway, all right. You might not buy, you might not make any money or anything else, but you get wicked excited at them meetings. You know, that's worth something on a cold winter's night right there. All right, so anyway, the guy gets out the car, and he heads across the dock, see, cutting across at a kind of a angle like this, right towards Douglas, and he had this look on his face that the tourists will get, which I refer to as souvenir lust. It's an overwhelming desire to muckle onto something, all right, that has Maine written on it. It could be made in Taiwan. It's got to say Maine right on there. Well, he walked up, and he seen this lobster trap sitting on the dock, see? And it was one of these traps. I don't mean these wire boxes, okay? But this was a real old-fashioned hardwood trap. I don't know if you know what these look like, but if you don't, they look exactly like a coffee table from L.L. Bean. That's a little shopping tip for you folks if you're going to Freeport. Well, anyways. He walked up, he took one look at that, he says, that was like that right there. He said, and it didn't have the lawn ornaments on there. But anyways, he muckled on, he says, I got to have that. And he asked Douglas if it was for sale. And Dougie gave him the traditional Maine answer. Yeah, he says, most everything around here is for sale for the right price. Well, you know, he said, how much? Oh, Doug says, I imagine I'd have to get $50 for that one. Well, you know, this fellow didn't want to get took advantage of. He wasn't quite sure that was the right price. He says, well, I guess I'll go down, poke around down on the dock, see what I can find. Doug says, suit yourself, dear. So he walked down the dock, he pried around down there, and for too long he struck upon a whole pile of lobster traps. I mean, there must have been 80 or 90 of them, and they was all covered with seaweed, barnacles, old fish heads in there. Depending on your point of view, okay, they was either scuzzy or rustic. Well, he thought he'd get a good deal on one of them. He run right back up, walked over to Dougie. He told him about the traps. Oh, Dougie says, yeah. He says, I know just the ones you're talking about, yeah. He says, sure, I'd sell you one of them, but I'd have to get $100 a piece for one of them traps. Well, you know, this fellow didn't think that was right. He said, I don't get it. How come you charge me twice as much for the old beat-up traps as you do for that brand new one? Oh, Doug says, that's easy. Them old beat-up traps, they belong to me. I don't know who the heck owns that one right there. So you got to be careful. And here's something. I ain't going to say too many things tonight that's serious, but I am going to say one thing, and this is the truth. If you ever wanted to know, see, I've heard people for years come to Maine, and they say, oh, these people in Maine are so hard to get to know. They talk funny, and they're very hard to get to know. I can't understand. They're very cold and hard to get to know. All right? It ain't true. But I tell you what is true. You can come from any place in the whole world and come to the state of Maine. You'll be just fine, dear. Everything will be hunky-dory as long as you don't break the only rule that really exists in the state of Maine, and that is you can't think that being from away makes you better than the local people. Ain't that true? You come in the state of Maine with what Unc would refer to as an altitude problem. You won't even get the number of the truck that hit you. All right, so I'm just saying that by way of explanation of what happened this next story here. Now, this happened down to Unc's store. My uncle, Steve, he had a store down East Maine, and it was just a little store. When I say store in Maine, I ain't talking about a Walmart, not yet. But see, he just had a little clapboard building and had a little porch out front, tin sign across the top just said Unc's Store. Pepsi, Pepsi. And there was some shotgun blast punctuating it in there, too. But see, now, Unc, he did a pretty good business. But you got to understand, in the state of Maine, in the summertime, there's a lot of celebrities that visit the state of Maine. There really are. Mel Gibson made a movie in here. Down by Harbor, they had Elton John was just here. Billy Joel, he's hanging around the old port. You know, there's all these limousines you see ain't all going to weddings. Let me tell you. All right, so this one day, we was in Unc's store, and we were just sitting around there and working on probably doing the inventory. A lot to do in them stores. We're probably restocking the Slim Jims. That probably take 2 or 3 hours right there. Well, we were doing something, all right, and this car pulled up out front. It was a limousine, went all the way across the whole front of the store, and I seen it, and this fella come out. It was a chauffeur. He come around the back. He opened the door in the back, and this girl come out, and it was her, that soap opera star from As the World Twirled. It was her. It was. Unc had watched that every day for about the last 21 years, and there she stood, and it was surprising, too, because on the show, she had tubes coming out of her. She'd been 2 or 3 car crashes and a couple of diseases. But, boy, she looked pretty healthy that day. She had one of them beehive hairdos. You know, you have to kind of point it out. Now, the local girls, they won't wear them because they get the deer flies in the summer, sticks in them wicked, but she come out, and I never seen anybody so happy as Unc was at that moment. He was grinning like a dog eating bumblebees. And he jumped up. She was walking towards the door. He seen her. He reached under the counter, grabbed his teeth, slapped them in. You know, walked right over. And when she walked through the door, he stuck his hand out and he said, "Let me just tell you, it is a marvelous pleasure to have you visit in our fair state and to welcome you to my humble store." Well, she took a look at him, and I imagine it'd be about the way a pit bull would eye a piece of beef. You know, and she looked down him and she says, she says, "I came to shop in your store, but that does not mean I have to have a conversation with the likes of you." I guess probably. Well, Unc, you know, he got the inference right away, see? And he sat down behind the counter. He didn't say nothing because he figured she was coming in to shop and she probably wasn't going to be using food stamps either. So he was going to bide his time, but he sat there, and let me tell you what she did. She went through that store with the chauffeur, and the chauffeur had the little calculator there in his hand. She would pick up an item off the shelf, see, and she'd plunk it down on the counter, and the chauffeur would make a note of the price to make sure she didn't get cheated. You understand what was happening here? Unc noticed it, believe me. Smoke was coming right out of his ears. Finally, she had got everything she wanted. She come over to the counter. Unc rung everything up on the cash register, give her the receipt, and she took that receipt. She double-checked every single item against the notes that chauffeur made to make sure she wasn't going to get overcharged for nothing. See? Went all the way down the list, and at the bottom, there was a $20 charge on the right-hand side and nothing over the left-hand side. Oh, she got wicked huffy. She turned around to Unc. She says, "What, may I ask, is that $20 on there for?" He says, "That, dear, is for sauce. I don't often take it. When I do, I charge for it." So just bear that in mind. That's a cautionary tale. But here's the thing, folks. I don't want you to feel as though you've got to be particularly smart to come up with the snappy answer. You don't. You really don't. That might be a big relief, some of you folks. You don't. Really, you just got to be from around here. See? It's a Maine thing. It's in the blood. It is. It's in the gene pool. It might be the shallow end, but it is in the gene pool. Of course, every time I think of the shallow end of the gene pool, it brings to mind our boy Hubert. Well, and look, don't get me wrong. He's a good boy, Hubert. He is. He's a little bit hard to describe Hubert. All right. You all know, you all heard of folks who don't know nothing, right? Hubert don't even suspect nothing. All right? If a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing, that boy's a walking time bomb. But there's something about numb kids, and you know this. If you have a numb kid, or if you are a numb kid, you know this. There's a certain enthusiasm. Huh? Hubert, every time he tries something, it don't matter how many times he fails, he's right after it. You know, he's happy as a clam in the mud at high tide. You know, and I remember when he was a kid, we used to go fishing up at Greenville, see. Every time we went fishing, Hubert wanted to go with us. He knew when we was getting ready to go, Hubert wanted to go fishing in the worst way, which is the way we knew he'd go if he ever did go. But see, now I remember one time, it was a Friday afternoon, me and the boys was going fishing. We had the pickup truck pulled into the drive with the camper on the back, idling, sitting in the driveway idling. Hubert seen it. He got all excited, got his fishing gear, run out, stood by the side of the door, you know, all excited, you know, standing there by the pickup truck, and we took the car, you know. But it never damped his enthusiasm. We come back Sunday night, he was still there, just... You can't beat them numb kids, but anyway. But he just recently, Hubert's a good boy, he really is. Last Christmas, he wanted to get a dog. I figured, what could they have me? The other kids wouldn't play with him. They knew how numb he was. And so he said, he wanted to get a dog. I says, fine. We went down to the Humane Society. He was going to pick one out. I begun to believe we was getting into trouble when he picked out this one dog. It was a kind of a muddy brown-colored dog. He named it Snowball. And I never expected to see another living, breathing creature that was on the same wavelength with Hubert, right? But this one was. And to be honest, it wasn't no wavelength they was going to license out the FCC either. And we got home, and they started playing this game. And it started off, it looked pretty normal. Hubert, they was out behind the trailer. Hubert would pick up a stick, see? He would heave it off in the pucker brush, and that Snowball go running after it. She'd come back about 10 minutes later with a snowmobile battery. But the thing is, see, Hubert never even blinked. He took the battery and heaved that out there. Dog come back a few minutes later with a carburetor or something. It just went on like that for hours. But here's the thing. Even Hubert is capable of coming up with a snappy answer. And this was a situation. I got to tell you about this situation. Now, this happened when we was living up to Palmyra. And you got to understand that the little town of Palmyra, there wasn't too much in the way of organized religion. There was a couple of churches. But that's just to give you an idea what happened. It started off, Hubert was innocently portraying, he was pursuing his summer project for his science fair in the fall. He was building a solar collector on the side of the barn out of hubcaps. There's a few of these in the state of Maine. They ain't wired up, but you'll see them around. And see, he got it right down to the point where he had the last couple of spaces, and he figured about an 87 Caprice would fit just perfect. But he made the mistake of liberating them off the sheriff's cruiser while the sheriff was in it, see? It was all right, because the sheriff knew Hubie, and he just gave him a warning. But as it happened, the warning come out in the Pittsfield newspaper, the Pittsfield Advertiser. Pittsfield was the nearest, closest major city to Palmyra. It come out in the paper, and it just so happened it come out on a Thursday, and that was the first day on the job of a young preacher, and this young preacher just graduated from the Bangor Theological Seminary, right? But like I say, it wasn't one of these, he was a member of this church. I don't know how to describe this. It wasn't affiliated with no denominations, nor likely to be, all right? It was a little building out on a dirt road with a sign hand-painted all over the door. I think it was the Powerhouse Church of the Presumptuous Assumption of the Blind in Light, or something like that, right? But all I knew for sure about that religion was whatever it was, they had to run right out and cram it down your throat 24 hours a day, and it was pretty tough. Anyways, he was right on fire to go out and save the world, and he picked up the newspaper, and he seen Hubert. He thought this was his calling to go out and change it. He called me up. He says, I feel the Lord has moved upon me to come in and change this boy's life. He says, I feel that I can talk some sense into that boy. I says, you and a bunch of other folks. No, he says, really, this is different. He went on, he started telling me all the theology. I said, hey, it's all right. Don't waste it on me. You can come talk to him. I just want to warn you before you come that greater ships than yours have run aground on these rocks. Well, it was all right. He made an appointment. He come out to see Hubert. And they walked out. He was out behind the trailer talking to Hubert, and I overheard the conversation. And he was trying to explain to Hubert how you should never, ever steal anything, because stealing represents greed, and greed's one of the 7 deadly sins, and he had about a 40-pound Bible there, King James red letter edition, and he cranked her up. He started off in Genesis, cranked her right through to Revelation, slapped her in reverse, come all the way back down through. Not one bit of that stuck to Hubert, you know. It was like the lights was on, but nobody was home, you know. And even with the ardent fire of a young preacher, he was beginning to sense that he wasn't making any progress. And maybe it was just out of desperation, but he struck upon an analogy. He reached in his pocket. He dug out 3 coins. He says, Hubert, what if I told you, and he held out his hand, he had a $50, a quarter, and a penny. He says, Hubert, what if I was to tell you that if you took that $50, that yes, in this life, you would have a $50, but after you pass on, you would have to go to hell. Well, now see, Hubert, you've got to realize, he has a certain look that passes across his face completely at random, but it's a look that's more or less like a deer caught in the headlights. You know, there's a lot of intensity, but really nothing behind it. Well, Hubert happened to flash one of them looks in the direction of that preacher just at that moment, and it gave him the confidence he needed to keep going. He says, Hubert, on the other hand, if you took that quarter, what if I was to tell you if you only took the quarter, yes, in this life you'd have half as much money, but after you pass on, you'd have to only go as far as purgatory, which Hubert figured that was kind of like hell with the thermostat turned down a few notches, right? But he cranked up, he says, on the other hand, Hubert, he says, if you only took that penny, he said, yes, in this life you would only have 1 penny, but after you pass on, you would get to go to heaven for eternity. Now, Hubert, given that choice, what would you do? Hubert looked at him, he looked down at them coins, looked back up at him, he grabbed all 3, he says, now I guess I can go any place I want to. Thank you. Now, I don't want you folks to get nervous thinking that Bobby Bryan of the original Bert and I recordings ain't coming out, because he is coming. And we're going to be doing selections from our big hit record, How to Talk Yankee, as well. Yeah, I don't know if you know this one, but we just certified that is a 1 million seller. We have 1 million of them in the cellar, so we do appreciate anything you can. And it's going to be a wet fall, too, so we really... Well, see, a lot of folks, before we get into the part where I bring Bobby on, I just want to let you know, a lot of folks don't really realize that before I become a wicked famous Maine humorist, all right, I had quite a career as a singer-songwriter in various different groups around the state of Maine. I did. I had a band called the Dubious Brothers. Oh, yeah, that was a real band. It was. We had an album out, Finish Life at Home in Your Spare Time. Yeah. Oh, yeah, you heard of the Dubious Brothers. Oh, yeah, we played down to Old Orchard Beach in the summer. They called us the Dubois Brothers, but hey, they still give us the $50. That was the important part, you know. But wherever we was like a lot of other groups. We played it, we had to start off at the lowest rung of the ladder. We played at these places that was euphemistically referred to as lounges. I never figured out exactly who was doing the lounging. Maybe it was them fellas face down on the floor at 1 o'clock in the morning. It could have been them. But I don't mean we never played at a classy joint. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong, folks. We did play. I'll tell you one thing right now. We played at the Hilton Inn at the Bangor Airport. You been there, ain't ya? Remember, I don't care. You been there, ain't ya? Yeah. Just hold on to that one concert. You'll do fine. How many here was in Ethiopia last night? Can I say that? I'll go a lot smoother. No, the Hilton Inn at the Bangor Airport. I'll tell you one thing about that. They built that right from scratch. They did. They didn't even start with a trailer. All right, you laugh. But in the state of Maine, that takes courage. Let's face it, most of us will hedge our bet. You get your trailer, you put the A roof on, not the whole A roof, part of the A roof, maybe a little tar paper, a little duct tape. You get duct tape and bungee cords, you pretty well keep it together for 2-3 years. Certain things a Mainer always has in the trunk of his car. But anyway, no, we played up there. The Hilton Inn at the Bangor, that was for us, that was a, well, of course they built it, you know, it was a skyscraper. Yeah, it must have been 5 stories right straight up. And up at the top they had the cocktail lounge, all glass. Now, of course, they couldn't afford the big ball bearing to make it spin around like they got down to New York. No. But I'll tell you something. You sat up there drinking long enough, and eventually, city of Bangor appears to rotate around you. Kind of a do-it-yourself technology they employed up there. Well, anyways, we ended up, like a lot of other groups, we could always get a crowd in the summertime in the state of Maine. We could always get the summer crowds pretty good. But in the winter, things are quite different. And we ended up kind of, you know, it got a little bit, see, in the winter, all the summer folks leave, the real Mainers go to Florida. You know, it gets tough. But we had friends that was encouraging us, and they kept telling us what we needed to do was that we had to go inland and go up to the ski areas. See, the ski. Because we didn't know nothing about no ski areas. They said if you go to the ski areas, you will run into the ski crowd. We didn't know nothing about no ski crowd. Maybe, you might be the ski crowd. I don't know. We didn't know. The more we asked about this ski crowd, the less we understood. Sometimes it's like that, you know, in life. Yeah, it really is. We would say to them, like, for instance, we'd say, well, what are they like, the ski crowd? And our friends would say, well, they drive Porsches. You see, I couldn't even picture that. I just figured it'd have to be an awful big parking lot, you know? But eventually, we just decided we just had to take the plunge, and we went up, we got ourselves a job up to near Carabasset in Kingfield, Maine, right on Route 27 on the way up Sugarloaf. We figured if we played up there long enough, we'd eventually have to run into some of this ski crowd group they were talking about. Say, well, I don't know if it was us or the place. It was I wouldn't say it was the classiest joint in Kingfield, let's put it that way. We played 6 weeks there one month. It was tough, but we stuck it out all winter long. We figured eventually, if we'd done this, we would run into somebody that was a member, at least 1 or 2 of the ski crowd. Well, I don't know if it was us or the place, but we never once run into one single member of the ski crowd. But I'll tell you something, we run head on into the skidder crowd. Oh, you know what a skidder is, don't you? Yeah. Now, you can be honest with if you don't, because some people don't. They don't. I was over at Vermont. Somebody told me they made skidders in a factory. I says, not likely, chummy. Says they don't make nothing in a factory with 4 different sizes of wheels on it. No, for them that don't, it's okay. You can admit it. If you don't know what a skidder is, it's a homemade vehicle. You make it out behind the trailer, out of the parts of the other cars that's already out there. All right, if you're lucky, you can start off with a 4x4 like an International Harvester Scout, and then you add on different parts from Pacers and Gremlins and Imperials and Coronets and Fairlanes and different things until you get it up to where it more or less runs. And it's a very limited purpose vehicle. What you do with the skidder, you get it running in the yard, you drive it out on the paved road, all right, until you see a woods road going off one side. See, you with me so far? Yeah. All right, you go down the woods road till you see a bunch of logs. You back your skidder up, take your chain off, muckle on the logs, twitch them out of there, drive back to the main road, unhook the logs, go to the beer store, come back, and do it again. That's what you do with the skidder, really. Now, these boys, and when I say boys, don't get me wrong, I don't want you to feel like this is a sexist term, all right? Because it ain't, really. I will say that the skidder crowd is virtually an all-male organization, and it ain't one, really, that the women are trying to break into at any great rate, either. I'd say it's probably at the last tail end of the now agenda to get really, they'll let them have that pretty much themselves for the duration, all right? But these are good boys. They're big boys. I'd say the smallest one probably dressed out 275 or better. Big, heavy-set boys. And they have a characteristic odor that you can't miss. I got a hold of a little vial of it. I took it up to the science department at the University of Maine at Fort Kent. They analyzed it for me. It turned out it was almost exactly equal parts of Old Spice, old motor oil, and old Granddad, kind of wafting together. Well, like I say, they're very big boys, and they have a certain outfit that they wear. And it starts off at the top. They will have a hat that usually says something like Caterpillar Diesel on there, something like that. All right, and then they will have, below that, they will have a T-shirt on. Now, you've got to understand here, it can be 40 below. They just have a T-shirt. All right, but it ain't what it says on the T-shirt that you want to notice that tells you that this is a member of the Skidder crowd. It always says something under the oil stains like nuclear power plants are built better than Jane Fonda, something like that, see? But it ain't what it says. It's the way it's cut, you see. And that is, it's always real tight around the neck, which there is a reason for that, because you can only make the neck of a T-shirt so big, you know. All right? And then it heads out from the neck at about this angle. And it crests right about here. All right? And just below that, there's a navel about the size of a Dunkin' Donut. Oh, yeah. You've seen these fellows, have you? Yeah. Just below that, there's a lifetime member NRA belt buckle. And it's attached to a set of Maine designer jeans with the crack in the back. Oh, yeah. Very popular in the state of Maine, all over the state of Maine. The clam diggers down east, they wear that same model. They call that the Deer Isle Smile. Huh? You'll see a lot of them from Route 1. Well, we went in, and at the time that we started performing for the Skidder crowd, we was what they referred to in them days as a top 40 group, see? Now, what that means is we played the same songs you hear on the radio every day. You just didn't recognize them right off. All right, so we had to learn to adapt our repertoire to the taste, and I use that term advisedly, of the Skidder crowd. So we had to learn all the country classics, the great ones, all the old-time country hits, like How Can I Miss You When You Won't Go Away? We got that one. How come you believed me when I told you that I loved you when you knew I've been a liar all my life? We did that one. Huh? I've been so miserable since you've been gone, it seems like you never left home. Huh? I'm telling you, they went nuts for that. And we finished up on Saturday night, we finished up with a country classic. This was a great one, and this would have the Skidder crowd crying in their beer within 30 seconds. A great country classic. If you want to keep the six-pack cold, put it next to my ex-wife's heart. That struck a nerve with them boys, probably. It was probably the only one available at the time. But anyway, before I bring Bobby on, I do want to, I want to thank everybody for coming out. This is great, and it's wonderful. It's a beautiful evening to do this. I was thinking about Bobby and Marshall Dodge, and a few years ago, Marshall really introduced me to the poetry of Holman Day. How many know? Need to be serious. Anybody know who Holman Day is? Tale of the Kennebec Mariner, and yeah. And he wrote in Maine around the turn of the century, and in one of his books, I think it's Up in Maine, Book of Poetry, he wrote a song in about 1910 that somehow I thought had lyrics that seemed to be just as true for any time in the state of Maine, and I put it to a musical tune, and I recorded it on one of my Bert and I releases, Back in Spite of Popular Demand. Yeah, that was my third album, wasn't it, Bobby? Third one? Yeah, that was another million seller. But anyway. Wouldn't be an emperor after supper's turned away. Wouldn't be a king, sir, if I could. As long as I have health and strength and a home where I can stay, and a woodshed full of dry and fitted wood. For Jimmy brings the boot jack and Mother trims the lights and pulls the roll of curtains, shutting out that storming night. And me and Jim and Mother and the cat sat down. Now who, my friend, would hanker for a crown? Well, who wants to spend your evening sitting starched and prim and straight, warm in royal velvet on a throne? Well, it's mighty tedious business setting up so thundering late, with not a moment's time to call your own. Well, I like to spend my evenings after working through the day with my old blue woolen stockings near the fire's social blaze. And me and Jim and Mother and that old gray cat, we come mighty near to knowing where we're at. I said me and Jim and Mother and that old gray cat, we come mighty near to knowing where we're at. Thank you. I've known Bobby Bryan for, I guess a little over a decade now, and Bobby's not only a founding member along with Marshall Dodge of the original Bert and I recording team, which is a real million seller, has sold 1 million copies. I think that's better than a poke in the eye with a chapstick, ain't it? Or something you just made up dubbing around. But he's also an archdeacon in the Anglican Church in Canada, and he's a 16,000 plus hour bush pilot. If you know anything about flying, you know that's fairly decent right there. So I'd like to have you join me right now in welcoming to the stage at Round Top, Mr. Reverend Robert Bryan. Bobby.
Someone asked me tonight if I'd tell the original Bert and I story. And now Marshall first heard this from a friend, or at least a version of it, back in about 1954 or 5. And when we were together at college, I got telling stories with Marshall, and we worked this one up. There's various versions. I've heard so many different versions that it's just you have to bear with me, because this is the original. This is the original version. Bert and I come down to the dock about 6 o'clock in the early morning. Bert went down into the boathouse to fetch the pots and the slickers, and I went out on the dock to start up the Bluebird. I stepped into the cockpit to loosen her up with a few turns. Well, so it was mighty cold. I advanced the spark, gave it more choke, and I cranked her up in earnest. Well, so I got it started. Bert come out down on the dock, and I told him to throw aboard the pots and the slickers. Throw 'em aboard, Bert. Bert, throw 'em aboard. Cast off the bow, Bert. Bert cast off the bow, loosed the springer, gave the dock a shove with the boat hook, and the Bluebird slithered out into the harbor. We hit nun number 2 about on schedule. When I sniffed a cold breeze coming in from the east, laden with humdidy. That would mean sniffing. Pretty soon we heard old Greasy Frog Light started in a fumfin. That were old Greasy Frog. Pretty soon we were locked in a dungeon of fog. Fog so thick you could stir it with a spoon. I told Bert to cut engine so as we could listen for the Bangor packet about due through at that time. Cut engine, Bert. Bum 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 bum. Sa sa. Bert cut engine. You better give a blast to the horn, Bert. Give it another one, Bert. Well, that were a good one, but it weren't good enough. For coming down to starboard, about 100 yards away, was the Bangor packet, making a full 10 knots. The Bangor packet smuck us midships and went clean on through us like green corn goes through the new maid. Well, we decided to dive for it. I went down, I suppose, about a fathom or so as to avoid the whirring propellers of the packet as she went on top. Go wow, 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 wow. Well, so when I come up the other side, I thrashed around in the water a bit and I cried out, Bert, Bert, where are you? Well, so there was no answer. But pretty soon, my hand come hold of a hard object. I grabbed hold of it, pulled it up. But George, it was Bert, almost drowned. Well, I emptied him a bit and held on to him, and we fetched onto a bell buoy, climbed top of it, and we were almost dried out when a fishing smack come along and took us back into Bucksport, Maine. Now, for all you people out there, and I can't see one of you, and I don't know if you're still here. But if you'd like, I want you to come on down to Bucksport and have a ride on the Bluebird 2 with Bert and I.
Bobby Bryant. It's a pleasure to share the stage with you, Bobby. Before we leave, I worked with Marshall for the brief period of a few months prior to his death. We had a wonderful time. He taught me a lot. He was a real mentor, and he was a very generous person. He had a habit of sort of collecting all sorts of paraphernalia every place he went, recording equipment, posters, artwork, books, and all sorts of stuff. And sort of being a conduit for this stuff. He'd pass it out to other people, and he always did it to stimulate creativity in other people. He started the Maine Festival and did a lot of things that encouraged other people. And at the time of Marshall's death, I was pretty upset, and I flew up to New Haven, to Yale, to the funeral, and Bobby was officiating. And on the airplane, I started writing a poem to try to put my feelings into words. And I used the form and the style of Holman Day that Marshall had introduced me to. And I wrote this poem, which became my first recording on the Bert and I label and the only single in the history of the Bert and I company. It's called The Junk of Marshall Dodge, and it goes like this. I'd like to take your treasures and your trinkets and your junk and load them in a boxcar in 19 steamer trunks. Get some played-out engineer with steam still in his veins from a life of hauling folks and freight from Boston up to Maine, and I'd stoke him with the vision, and I'd enlist him in my scheme to run that train around the world, distributing a dream. And should he chance to ask me who might want this old hodgepodge, I'd say, this ain't just any junk, my friend. It's the junk of Marshall Dodge. Now, with every detail overlooked and only grace to guide us, we'd steam across the continent with Marshall's junk beside us. We'd run that train to every little town along the track. We'd stop and draw a crowd with whistles, bells, and Union Jacks. And as they started gathering, men and kids and ladies large, I'd shout into my megaphone, step up, folks. There's no charge. Feel free to touch the merchandise. It's more than rummage off some barge. You know, this ain't just any junk, my friend. It's the junk of Marshall Dodge. Now, with the help of my assistants just recruited from the crowd, I'd push a button on the floor and bring the music up real loud, and them bolts would snap, and them locks would slide, and them trunks would open wide, and men would peer, and ladies crane to see what lay inside. Don't just stand there, folks, I tell them. Help yourself. This stuff is free, with one small stipulation. Now, listen carefully. Feel free to take whatever strikes your fancy from this heap, but only if you understand it isn't yours to keep. It's only yours to spread around and share with friend and foe. And if you can keep that promise, why, take something before you go, like a book to send a relative who's homely as a stump, or a bicycle that's built for two to help you o'er the humps, or a tape machine to capture tales your Uncle Jasper tells, or a boat that's called the Bluebird too, to skim across the swells, or an anecdote to crack a smile across the sourest face, or a pin to prick the pompous and put them in their place. It's all there for the taking, folks. Pick well or not at all. Always many hamlets yet to hit whilst circling this ball, and many folks along the way in cities small and large who just like you will gawk and peek and smile when we tell them there's no charge, because this ain't just any junk we're handing out. It's the junk of Marshall Dodge. Thank you for coming. You've been marvelous. Come back to Round Top. You'll be glad you did. Thank you.